slides tonight. And I encourage everyone to go back, watch this again to read the bullet points. I'm not going to be reading bullet points. I'm going to point out things in the pictures that'll help you maybe generate questions that you can put in the chat or on Facebook. So what are we covering today? We're going to cover the basics on pruning. What are the benefits? Touch on apples and pears mainly. We're going to touch a little bit on peaches and just briefly on blueberries. Okay, principles of pruning. So first thing you need to know, we're going to talk mainly about apples. You see right here on this picture, apple trees have a central leader. That means one branch that goes all the way up to the top and until you get your desired height. So one branch all the way up. That's important when you're looking at 2-year-old, 3-year-old trees and how you want to prune them. You want to make sure you maintain a central leader. We'll talk later about the peach trees and what was called the open vase. Right now is the best time to prune in mid-March to like about mid-April when the first green tissue comes out. We're going to talk about where to make the cuts, how to make cuts, and right here you see what's called, this would be like your central leader, for example. This branch right in the middle, this shows how you don't want to cut too close to your main central leader. You want to come out a little bit so that this has time to heal. It's a collar is what this is called right here. And usually that's about the size of your thumb or your pinky finger. Bigger trees would be like your thumb, smaller trees would be like the size of your pinky finger. That's the distance right in here that you want to leave. That way this can heal and you don't get involved with this. When you're making big cuts, what you're going to do is cut a little bit on the bottom first and then cut top down so that you don't have a situation, and this shows it here, where you don't have a situation where you're bark ripping or scalping that bark all the way down. Big branch, if you start at the top only, the weight of the branch will rip that bark off all the way down. That makes it hard to heal. And so this kind of shows, smaller pruners, you're going to cut out a little bit. Big saw, cut a little bit here first, then come top down. Again, we're going to talk about where to cut, but this is just how to cut. But this shows eventually that will heal over, and that's what you want, so that the tree doesn't get diseased and it doesn't get infected. The branches. So in our orchard, when we talk about branches, we want to maintain branches that are really, it says say you're 40 to 60 degrees from vertical, and that is true like for your younger trees. They might start off, and this is maybe 45. If this branch starts going up too high, it's not going to be able to bear weight because the branch is going to bend down with the weight of the fruit, right? And there's some other things involved in that too, but the bottom line is you want branches that are coming out like this, and eventually as they get older, they're going to sag with the weight of the fruit, that's 90 degrees, and then when they start going down, that's where you're going to end up cutting them off, okay? But this is called the crotch angle. That's the angle of which the secondary branch is coming out from your main central leader, and you want really like below this 45, ideally like 30 to 60 degree, 30 degrees here would be perfect, coming out about like this. So I say that because when you look at your tree, what's important is not as much what you're going to cut, but what are you going to save? You want to look at the branches that are worth saving, that will have the fruit, and then you have to think about what's in their way. What is taking away from those branches? And so again, when you think about pruning, it's not so much what you're going to cut, it's what you're going to save that's important. So once you identify your central leader, that's that branch going right up the middle, I encourage you to look for those good branches you want to save. And while you're looking at those branches you want to save, you're obviously identifying things that are dead, diseased, partially broken branches. they're never going to be able to come back to their full potential and bear the weight of fruit. And for all of our goal here, we're talking about fruit trees. And so if it can't bear fruit, it needs to be pruned out. It needs to go. As you get more detailed, yes, once branches kind of cross over each other and they're shading each other, they're in each other's way, that's the time you would prune those out. You also want to think about time of harvest, right? So if you can't reach in there and get in there with a ladder and pick those apples, then you need to open the tree up more by pruning out some of those branches that are in your way, okay? Suppress limbs that might be, again, going down towards the ground. I call them rabbit food. There's no sense in growing rabbit food, in my opinion, unless that's your goal. So those branches that are down in the way of the lawnmower, getting on the tree, that are just going to be eaten by animals before you get to them, you might as well take those branches out as well. For those of you that have really big trees, which we're going to talk about and show some pictures, once you start and get over 5-inch cuts, that becomes it's a shock to the tree, okay? Because the tree is a balance between the roots and the scion up above where the leaves are, the branches and the leaves. So the two feed off each other. If you go cutting too much, then sometimes it gets out of balance. Then there's a lot of regrowth. So that's why we talk about this 1/3 of the crown and the bottom needs to stay alive. Okay, so you don't want to like prune out half the tree. That would be too much of a shock to the roots, and the roots would start to die. Okay, so the objective of pruning, right? We want to maintain good fruit quality, and it's really a balance. Some of you might be doing this for yourself, some might be doing it for deer, but even for those for deer, you want to maintain a healthy tree that comes back the next year with fruit buds. So now I have had a question every year. We've had a question here that asks about, well, one year we had a whole bunch of apples, and the next year we didn't have any. And so I want to cover that just a little bit here when it talks about vegetative growth and excessive flower buds. So you know your trees better than anyone, but what generally happens is apple trees and pears, and to a lesser extent peaches, can get into what's called biannual bearing. Biannual bearing means every other year is a good year. And what happens is there's a lot of flower buds one year, you let the tree crop all that fruit, and the tree is just loaded. It's a wonderful year. Look at my tree, it's great. And it's generally small to medium apples. The next year you go out and they're like, there's no flowers. What happened? What happened was last July, when the tree was loaded down, it didn't have enough energy to set flower buds for the next spring. And therefore it gets into biannual bearing, because the next spring it has no flowers, no fruit, but that July, just 2 months after it should have flowered, it has tons of energy because it has no fruit. So it sets a ton of flower buds, and then the cycle starts over again. So what you want to do, if you know you had not a lot of fruit last year, then this spring is the spring where you need to remove excessive flower buds. And that means really prune harder. If you know you had a lot of apples last year, this is the year to go light on the pruning. That is a very, very important concept that will save you a lot of frustration and wondering, why does my tree not have flower buds? Okay. Apple trees can survive -30 degrees Fahrenheit in the wintertime on flower buds. So if you don't have flower buds, it probably wasn't because they got killed in the wintertime, not here in Michigan. All right, improves light through, okay, you want to get light into the tree. Obviously, leaves need light. And again, you just have that balance where you're not growing a whole bunch of smaller apples, you're growing more medium-sized apples. When you get in a good cycle, doing a little bit of pruning every year will help you maintain. This picture kind of shows the difference between a smaller tree, a bigger tree. and the whole idea of sunlight. I will let you come back and review this on your own. The important thing is you want to kind of bring that. A lot of people ask, well, how tall is this tree? As tall as you want to pick. All right. I know we'll cover that in just a little bit about the height of trees. Okay, this is important for apples. Also, the pears look similar, but this is an apple photo, and these are apple fruit buds. Okay, a lot of people ask, is that going to be an apple? Well, actually, that fruit bud on average could potentially have 5 flowers and 5 apples. You only want about 1 apple on that fruit bud, and generally speaking, you want 1 apple about every 7 inches on the tree, on a branch like this, for it to be a regular size apple, and not to overload the tree so that it comes back the next year with flowers. So what you need to understand is this little tiny guy here will be a leaf. That leaf could turn into a branch. Okay, this fruit bud here can turn into 5 flowers, which could potentially turn into apples. All right, so that's something that you need to understand. And we're going to talk about that later, because when you see a water sprout would only have vegetative or leaf buds. Those terms can be used interchangeably. A vegetative bud, I mean, there's no fruit on it. Okay. So we're talking about branches and orientation. Here's an example. This could be a tree that you got from the tree sale coming up, and you see it's nice, it's slender, it's got some fruiting buds right here, and it's got some shoots that have come from vegetative leaf buds. And then this whole part here is 1-year-old growth. So that's important to identify. Fruit buds only grow on 2-year-old wood on apples. Okay, that's important to know, unlike peaches. So this is all last year's growth. Okay, right here you see a branch, an example of a branch with a good angle. This is like a 30-degree angle roughly. This is a good angle. This branch would come out, you would prune it maybe, and it would start to bear fruit, and that branch would start to bend down. And after 2 or 3 years, that branch is maybe bending down below horizontal, and you would cut that branch out and it would be replaced. A lot of people ask, when should we be pruning? So yes, right now is a good time, mid-March, once the snow is gone and the negative temperatures are gone and it's above 20 degrees Fahrenheit, that's a good time to prune. And I would go all the way to green tissue, and that would be depending on whatever fruit you're talking about. So if we're talking about blueberries, then I would prune right up to the green tissue is coming out, and that's going to depend on the variety actually. We're not really going to talk about summer pruning here, but it would just be like we're talking about here, taking out that 1-year-old growth that just shoots right out where you don't want it. So that's what can be done in the summer. But right now we're talking about March, early April pruning. Okay, I'm going to let you come back and review this slide on your own. And you can get really technical on some of this. The key is a lot of the cuts that we do in our orchard are going to be like some of these bench cuts, to where you have a branch and then it keeps on, it starts to go up more like you see here. And we would prune to what I call a lateral. A lateral means a branch going out, because that's really the angles that we want to maintain on a branch going out, because it will have less shading, and it'll make it easier to harvest these apples by reaching your arm in like this. Okay. Okay, so some of you are buying new trees. You have a little tree, you bring it home. Anything less than 24 inches is rabbit food, and you're going to look at. So I'm going to go to a slide. I'm going to let you guys come back and look at these words. I'm going to go to the slide that has the tree on it. It'll make more sense, I think, here. So you get the tree from the tree sale, you plant the tree, and it's got a couple shoots you see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's got this here. First thing you do, always identify the central leader. What's the strongest branch going straight up the middle or closest to the middle going up? That's what you want to save. You're definitely saving the central leader on an apple tree or a pear tree. Okay, so you're saving that. That means now, notice here, and the last slide talks about it, you're going to cut maybe this branch here, this branch, you're cutting some branches back. And you say, well, why are we cutting branches back? Well, sometimes, especially these side branches, okay, it's a balance between the scion, that's the part of the tree up here, and the roots, okay, and the roots. And so the roots have been, they've gone through trauma because they've been dug up, and usually they get cut a little bit, and then they've been stored, and now you're putting them back into new soil that they're not used to. The short story is you need to reduce how much wood up here is dependent on the roots down here the first year to get the tree back in balance. Otherwise, these roots cannot supply enough energy for this part of the tree. And it's going to kind of go into shock, and it's going to kind of go off to a slow start. If you prune it well the first year, when you plant it on planting, then it should shoot out and it'll put new growth where you want it to have new growth. So again, think of the balance, roots and the scion, which is up here. That's the top part of the tree. This is just an idea looking down. You know, obviously you want branches going in all angles, okay? A lot of people, like, here's a good example. Say, well, where's my central leader? Well, it's here, it's here, it's here. Then, well, where is it here? Is it this one or this one? So there, one philosophy I'll give you is, if this was west, let's say the wind was coming from this direction and I had a little tree and it's already been planted, I might cut this one out. I might make this the central leader, because I know the prevailing wind is going to blow this branch, and over a couple of years, it's going to make it straight. Now, ideally, before you plant the tree, I would identify this branch and I would turn this tree around so it's going into the prevailing wind. And then I would cut this one and have this branch get blown up straight by the prevailing wind. Okay, so these are important concepts to think about. You can't change the direction of the wind, and so have nature work with yourself. So second year pruning. Okay, so again, second year pruning, you're just going to be light on the terminals. When possible, spread the branches. We're going to talk about that a little more. But again, identify your central leader. Okay, 2-year-old trees. Here's an example. You planted the tree last year. You can see how you're cutting back a little bit, and you're really trying to spread these branches that are going up beyond the 45 degrees. You're trying to push them back down instead of just pruning them out, because Steve said prune them if they're up too right. Try to push them down with wood, and there's other things you can use. We can talk about in the chat, but push those branches down. It's a lot easier to train wood than it is to wait a couple years to try to regrow it. Okay. This is an example of how you could train it with some biodegradable wood. That way, if you forget it and it stays in there, the tree can push it and it'll rot away, and it won't cause a problem, as opposed to metal that's going to stay there forever and not decompose. So you're trying to push the limb down so that there's an angle like this, 30 degrees off here, which would be like, 60 from vertical. We can talk about this in chat, but here's a little photo that reminds us you can do all this hard work, but if you don't protect it from the deer and the rabbits, then your hard work may quickly die. And some of you are probably well aware that we have an 8-foot fence 2 miles all the way around the farm. And there's a reason we have an 8-foot tall fence 2 miles around our orchard, because it paid for itself in the first year on damage. All right, 3rd and 4th year. Okay, making sure, here's an example. This tree's a little older than 4 years, but it's an example of how you're getting these branches coming off. These are all 2 or 3-year-old branches, which is great for fruiting wood. You're maintaining a central leader, okay? And in any spot where there's water sprouts, again, are shooting straight up. Some of them are out of the ground. Some of them are shooting right off these branches. You remove those, okay? And you want to defruit that central leader. And I'm going to go back to this picture right here. So if this was my central leader and I had a bunch of flower buds here, I am going to literally rip those fruit buds off, because I don't want this to get way down with apples and then flop over and break. I want to grow this straight and tall, get it above the deer line, okay, so that the tree can begin to grow without getting damaged by deer, because the deer will eat those fruit buds up and the tree will stop growing there. All right, beyond 4 years. Again, we're maintaining, this is an example of something that would need to be pruned. It's got some good scaffolds down here that we're maintaining. Those are the branches coming out at good angles. And then up top, you can see where it's starting to have good branches, but you're gonna wanna give a little more sunlight in here and prune that down a little bit more. So a lot of people ask, people wonder, how tall is this tree? Sue, you probably had questions like that before.
I did, Steve. Thanks. And actually, we had Valerie emailed us and asked a question that I think is relevant here. She says, I have a yellow standard transparent tree and wondered if I could prune the top out so the whole tree stays at 16 to 18 feet for height. Is topping a tree a bad idea?
That's an excellent question. And the answer is you can definitely top the older trees. Once they're well established and they're the height that you want, what I would do is cut to a lateral. And what I mean by that, let's say my ladder only went up to here on this tree. I would save this branch because it's important what you're going to save. I would cut to a lateral. I'd cut right here and I would save this lateral branch going this way because that's going to fruit and it's going to encourage the tree not to regrow beyond where you want it to grow. Okay, so always try to cut to laterals on this is going to be apples and pears work well like that. Apples and pears, and to a lesser extent peaches, which don't get as tall. But yes, apples can get really tall. Bring them down to size, and that is something. If you're cutting more than 2 or 3 feet off the top, we're going to talk about that in here in a little bit. You're going to maybe do that in a couple of years. Okay, that means you cut it down 2 feet. The next year you cut it 2 more feet, and let the tree and the roots adjust so it's not a big shock. Excellent question, Sue. Here's another example of a 6-year-old tree. Again, the whole thing is starting to go up. It's just going up, 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 all these verticals. And you want to push those back down, down. So they're going out, more like a Christmas tree type look is what you're really going for. And then here's an example where we spread it and then we've cut it back down, but we've maintained that central leader right up the middle. Okay. That is so important. Now this one here, we're looking at this picture right here of an old tree, okay? And some of you may have trees like this. You're thinking, well, what are we gonna do? Again, this old tree here, I'm looking at the central leader going right up the middle, okay? And then I'm looking at these whorls. And when you go back and look at the slides, it's talking about saving these scaffold branches that might be 10, 15, 20 years old. Okay, these trees here are older than I am. They were here when we bought the farm in 1971. It's an old spy tree, but you can see some of these good laterals. Now, this one has not been pruned yet, but I want you to see how you need to look at the bones of the tree. Look through all this other stuff and look, what am I going to save? I'm saving these good scaffolds, and then go through and take off the low-hanging branches that may have been fruited and going down, and the branches going straight up. Okay, so again, you can look at this, but you're maintaining the branches going straight out. You're taking off the branches, the water sprouts that are going straight up. Okay. Here's a good example you can come back and look at. Big tree, overwhelming work. But again, you figure out what you're going to save, and then this is what it looks like when you're done. So everything we just talked about was apples and pears. I want to talk about peaches a little bit now. So we're not going to go into depth on peaches, but again, what are you going to save? You're going for an open vase system, which means instead of one branch going straight up, you literally have a cup and like an upside down vase. And peach trees, they grow a little differently. You're going for this look when you have peach wood together, kind of a U-shaped union. And this shows how a peach tree could start out, and right in here, the sun is literally coming in the middle right here. This is totally open in the middle, and you have these branches going off. And then from those branches, you grow 1-year-old wood that you regrow every year that has your peaches. Your peaches are on the smaller wood that grows off of the bigger scaffolds. That's peaches. Okay. I know every year we get a few questions about blueberries. And again, we're just gonna do one slide on blueberries here, but blueberries, in the beginning, we talked about crowns. Here's the crown. Blueberries are different than fruit trees because the roots can regrow the same variety, okay, on all your main blueberries. Blueberries are not grafted and they can regrow. So we regrow a cane, that's this branch coming up off the crown every year. So from the roots, we can regrow. And the idea with an old bush, a blueberry bush, is that you want to maintain really like 3-year-old, 4-year-old canes coming off the ground. Once that cane loses color and it looks like an old bark, it needs to go. All the way down at the crown is where you would prune that out for a blueberry bush, and then it's going to regrow. And you're always going to have 1-year-old wood, 2-year-old wood, and 3-year-old wood coming off your blueberry bushes. And so I realize some of you might have a tree in your backyard that looks like this, and you're thinking, oh my, what are we going to do? And so we encourage you to go back, look at these slides, and take it one step at a time, because you do not want to like tackle this tree all in one year. This is something you would spread out over 3 years. And yes, the first year you're going to take a chainsaw if you can, and start working on that. So good luck with your pruning. And I know we're going to be opening up to questions now.
All right. Thank you very much for that, Steve. That was an awesome presentation with a lot of great information. Again, participants or viewers at home will be able to play this back so that they can slow it down, pause it, whatever they need to do on certain slides to get all the information they need for their pruning. We do have some questions. I'll go first, and then Sue, you can read the second one. So the first one we got on Facebook Live was, any suggestions on how to protect young fruit trees against cicadas? They destroyed my fruit trees 17 years ago, and with Swarm X coming this year, it's definitely a concern.
I don't have a specific recommendation for that. That is a very yeah, that's kind of one of those things that just happens. So I guess I've never tried to find an answer for that. What I would tell you is the same thing. We used to grow cherries at the country mill, and finally we realized, and sweet corn, and we realized we were, the only ones in the neighborhood. And so a lot of wildlife that like that would come straight to that. And so sometimes you make sure you have enough other food to feed, wildlife. So that's kind of a general statement, but I don't have a good advice for you on the cicadas. Sorry.
All right, go ahead, Sue.
Hey, thanks, Hannah. Steve, I have a question from Larry. In pruning apples, I have trees, Northern Spy and Yellow Delicious, that it seems that since pruning it, that there are multiple water sprouts that come up from the removal of a single water sprout from last year. Is there any way to decrease the number of water sprouts that occur each year?
Great question. So yes, again, we go back to that 1/3 rule. Try to spread out your pruning 1/3, 1/3. That will reduce it, and don't do it all in one area. So we're not talking about like this third of the tree. We're talking about all over the tree, equally balanced. And then you will get water sprouts. You will get regrowth. That is one area where if it's a big tree and you get a lot of regrowth, go in July with leather gloves and just rip that regrowth out. Rip it out. Don't prune it out. Rip it. That's different than what we talked about in the slides. You're literally going to rip it down to the roots, so to speak, kind of like pulling out hairs, and it's going to discourage it from actually regrowing there. It's in the summertime where the tree can rapidly heal itself. It's in July, which is the driest month during the growing season. So you're not opening up for infection. So that's what you can do is those water sprouts, that's 1-year-old wood with vegetative buds. It's just smooth, fast growth. Rip it out by hand in July. There are some chemical things you can do that you can put. Basically, it's an inhibitor. We don't use it here, but you can mix it with latex paint and with white paint and paint it there. You can Google that and look that up. But NAA would be what you would look up. It's an acid that stands for an acid that you would mix with latex paint. Some people do that. We don't really do that anymore. It's a lot of time, but if you really wanted to do something that would inhibit that regrowth.
Thanks, Steve. My next question, can you espalier prune a fruit tree? Espalier? Espalier? E-S-P-A-L-I-E-R. Is that where they train them like grapes?
That's a great question. I am not familiar with that. I mean, you can, okay, yeah, to put it against the structure is what you're saying. So yeah, the term we would use, so I think what you're talking about is basically, can you train trees to grow along, like in a certain shape or along a wall or around a trellis? And so yes and no. You can't really, you can force it and you can tie branches to individual, shape or trellis that you want. It's a lot of work. I guess, if that's what you want to do for like artistic reasons, you can. What we have done, if you Google dwarf apple trees, yes, and you come out to our orchard in the fall to pick apples, you'll see we have some trees that are 40 inches apart. And they have bamboo sticks on the central leader. So the central leader is tied to a bamboo stick. And those are dwarf trees. We do that so that we can fruit the trees earlier. And we're not growing a structure. Instead, we're giving the trees support so that they can begin flower bud initiation, flower buds sooner in their lifetime. So like year 3 instead of maybe year 5 or 6. And so I think where you're going with that question is, yes, you can train a dwarf tree and give it support. I would not grow, again, it depends on what you're doing. If you're going for artwork, I think you can do it, but I would not grow a tree against a wall because you're going to lose half the production. You need good airflow to stop for diseases and whatnot. But it is possible to train a tree on trellis. So I invite you to come out here in the fall in September and October. You can look at some of our trees. We have like 3 wires and 5 wires. And so we will train a tree to those different wires that are maybe at like 7.5 feet, 5 feet, 3 feet, and so on. And we tie it with essentially like rubber bands. It's medical tubing that we use. So that's a good question.
Thanks, Steve. We have another question on Facebook Live about, can you cut surfaces with anchor seal or equivalent? You
can do a lot of treatments. I will tell you what we do. I will tell you what most for-profit orchards do. We don't do anything because you can spend, again, a lot of time and a lot of money, keep the trees healthy, and prune in the right time, which is like right now, the next like 2 or 3 weeks, and let the tree heal itself. And you shouldn't have to, treat it with anything. But I know you can, Google that and you can see the people do it. But, it's like anything else. If someone's selling something, and there's just a balance between what is like economically viable and what is like textbook scientifically, more viable. And it probably is, but we've kind of gone away from doing that from a labor standpoint and a cost standpoint.
Great. I have a question for you, Steve, from Kimberly. Where did we go there? Is there any treatment other than leaf cleanup for black spot for apple trees?
Excellent question. So I'm going to answer this two ways. One is, I know there's a lot of good questions about how do we care for trees? How do we care for apple trees? And so that could almost be a whole nother, seminar, etc. I would encourage folks with the Master Gardener Program through MSU Extension to look into the Michigan State University Extension Program, Master Gardener Program in their own county. And that will allow you to get into a whole bunch of knowledge about what is good treatments in your area. I once had a customer ask me, hey, I got these apple trees in my backyard. My wife told me she doesn't want any disease, any bad apples in my backyard anymore. What can I do? I said, the cheapest and best thing you can do is get a chainsaw, okay, and start over. There are apple trees that are disease tolerant. You can Google that, disease tolerant. And I say tolerant, you might have to Google disease resistant, which is not true, but disease tolerant apple trees. And you can find varieties, some of which we grow here in our organic orchard, that are less prone to certain diseases. That's a good place to start for a backyard orchard person. That you want to have a simple life without a lot of treatments. And so to answer your question, I'm not going to recommend any treatment on that. There's stuff you can buy at Myers or Walmart. It says orchard. It's got obviously some fungicides. It's kind of an all-in-one thing, but it kind of gets more in depth than I can answer right here as far as whether you should do it or not do it, or side effects and pros and cons. So that is a good question that really is another whole topic.
Thank you, Steve. And yeah, it's a good thing I put this slide up today for, if you do need help with tree care or anything like that, I definitely encourage you to reach out to a local arborist or tree care company. And you can actually go and search for a tree care professionalist in your area by going to the Trees Are Good website or ISA Michigan's website. So they're going to be able to help you out with the actual tree care and if you need assistance in any pruning and that sort of thing. But I do have another question that came in. How can I pull back a tree? I have staked it and it still tends to lean to the north.
That is a good question. And I guess it depends on how old the tree is. I would tell you if it's 2 or 3 years old, you should still be able to move it. If it's not, what you're going to need to do probably, if you've already tried it a lot, you're literally going to need to get a branch near the top that looks like it's going back straight up and down. And one thing you can do is start that tree over. Again, you're going to want to do it over the graft union. And the graft union is that part of the tree. You can Google that and look for pictures. Graft union. That's the part that should have been planted just above the ground. And anything from that point on will be the same variety. And look for a branch going straight up, a new central leader essentially, and then cut off the old part of the tree that's leaning too far to the north and start with a fresh branch going straight up the way you want it to be. Because once wood's like 3 years old, you're not going to move it. The springtime when ground's really soupy, that's your best chance, but you're probably going to break some roots and you might break off the graft union. And that is an issue that happens in big orchards too. A lot of times from the west, the wind blows the trees hard and you'll snap graft unions in storms. So that's a good question.
That's a really good point. Okay, I have a question from Larry. You mentioned one fruit bud can create 4 or 5 blossoms. You mentioned that some of the blossoms can be removed. Is there an ideal number of blossoms to leave to maximize the size and number of fruit?
So again, great question. What I would do, because we live in Michigan and we're always subject to spring freezes, your best bet is to go ahead and wait until you get through bloom, pollination, and there's no big spring freezes. That would be my suggestion for someone that has 1 or 2 apple trees. And then you can take off extra, the little apples when they're like marble size, hand thin them, take them off by hand. And that's going to be like mid-May, late May, early June at the latest. you can take them off, to have one apple every 7 inches on the same branch, about one apple every 7 inches on the same branch. And that will give you a good balance to where the tree comes back with fruit buds in next year. We talked about removing, I actually talked about removing fruit buds. So that'd be right now on the top of young trees, like a 1-year-old, 2-year-old, 3-year-old, or 4-year-old tree. That central leader, like the top foot or 18 inches, you could literally take your hand, wrap it around that central leader, and go from top to bottom. And it'll rip off all those little fruit buds that are coming off, and they'll just fall off. Each fruit bud will be about 4 to 5 blossoms, and you don't want that fruit at the top of a young tree, because the structure of the tree can't handle the weight yet. It'll bend that top of the tree over. And so it's just kind of one of those balances. The tree will stop growing as a tree, and it'll be runted out because it went reproductive too early in its life.
Okay, thank you, Steve. We're getting more and more questions on Facebook. I have another one about how do you prune an old apple and plum tree that has been neglected? And I know you covered this a little bit in your presentation, that you want to start it little by little over the course of a few years. Is there anything you want to add to that?
Yes, I would add, as a refresher, we talked about 1/3 at a time. Again, figure out what are you going to save, identify the central leader. I'm saving the central leader. What are the scaffolds you want to save? Those are those big branches, like the size of your arm or your leg, that go out from a really big old tree. So you want to figure out which ones have good angles. Again, you're kind of making shelves, if you will, on the tree. A lower whorl of scaffolds would be like a shelf, kind of a first floor. Then you get like a second floor and a third floor as you go up in the tree, maybe 3 feet or 5 feet apart on a big tree. Figure out what you're going to save. You could even take a can of spray paint and put like green, like, okay, we're saving these, and then figure out, okay, these are the branches that need to go. So, and then as you go around the tree as a circle, you're going to try to do a little bit on all the way around the clock, so to speak, right? So it's not just like, oh, we did this the north side. You want to do the north, the east, the west, the south, a little bit of pruning in all directions. And then what I didn't mention in the video is I would actually suggest you would start at the top of the tree and some in the bottom, but do it kind of balanced, so that the top of the tree is where it's going to regrow. If you do a bunch of big cuts down low, and the top of the tree is still very vegetative, a lot of leaves, it's essentially a sun umbrella. And so you're not going to get any sun down to the lower part of the tree, and it won't necessarily regrow like you want. So I would go top down if it's a lot of, you have a lot of branches up top. You got to make sure sun gets down to the bottom. So if you broke up in a third, you could do the top and then work your way down the tree. So by the time you get to the bottom, you cut out a big cut in the bottom, there's sunlight actually getting down there because you've already pruned the top, on year 1 and 2.
That's a really good point. Okay, I have a question from Don. I'm generally in Arizona till the first week of April. Can I prune when I return? Can I prune at that time, or is there another time when I can do so?
So
early April.
Yeah, again, good question. Early April. So it's really going to depend on where your trees are at. So as soon as you get back from Arizona, you go out, look at your tree. You can still kind of prune when there's green tip, we call it, when there's green starting to come out of the tree. You can, and you can prune a little bit beyond that. What you run the risk of is a couple things. One is infection, because diseases have evolved to be mature when the tree is actually growing. Okay, that's the best way to explain it. And it's all based off of degree days, which is how much heat do we get. It's like from March 1st, how many hours is it actually over 50 degrees, or how many hours is it over 42 degrees Fahrenheit? Every disease reacts to different temperature accumulation. So the short story is you got a tree or two. If it's older, especially, I wouldn't worry about it. Go ahead and do it. It's better than not pruning at all. But once you start getting into bloom stuff, farther down, you start seeing the flower buds coming out, I would not get into it, because that's when disease pressure hits its highest, is during bloom. So again, diseases unfortunately have evolved to match up with the with the life cycle of the apple tree, or any fruit tree for that matter. And so we prune dormant because diseases aren't going to infect that cut as likely. And also, again, carbohydrates are stored down in the roots, just like maple syrup, sap is down there, and then it comes up right now, and literally in March before the leaves come out. And so all that energy is going up. And if you want to cut off the branches you don't want before carbohydrates are sent to those branches. Otherwise, you're kind of wasting that energy on a branch that you're going to prune out.
So Steve, I have a follow-up on that. When would be the earliest in the fall I could prune? Say we're done with the apples, we're starting to get some frosty nights. When would be the earliest I could prune in the fall or early winter?
Right, commercial apple growers, I mean, sometimes we will start in November. Once the leaves have dropped, that's a sign that the apple tree has already recognized that winter's coming, and it is starting to harden itself off. I would do that on your oldest trees first, your most healthy trees, your biggest trees. They can take that better than a small young tree. We always wait on our youngest trees last. I would do apples first, then pears. Peaches, I wouldn't touch until March. I wouldn't even touch them until this time of year. And the same would be true really for blueberries and other sensitive fruits. Apples are a very hardy fruit. You can prune mature apple trees in November once the leaves have dropped. Good question.
I have another question, Steve, on Facebook. Should you top your trees every year during training them, and also lateral branches? It says also head lateral branches, or do you just let the lateral branches grow?
Generally speaking, we're going to let those lateral branches that are going straight out from the central leader, we're going to let them grow. We're going to let them fruit. I talked earlier about how they usually come out maybe like a 30, 45 degree angle. They're going to be young. They're going to get fruit buds the second year. They're going to get the weight of fruit on them. They're going to start to bend down. They're going to be parallel with the ground. So like a 90 degree angle from the central leader. Then, year 3 or 4 or 5, they're going to start to go down below horizontal. And then once they get like 30 degrees below horizontal, that's where you're going to want to cut them out. If you go back to that one slide where it showed you cutting a branch right next to the central leader, that's a good time to cut that branch out. On dwarfing size trees, smaller trees. On your really big trees, you'll do the same thing against like the big scaffold branch, the bones of the tree. So short answer is fruiting wood is best when it's like 2, 3, 4 years old. And then generally speaking, it's bent down and it's kind of spent, and you're going to want to cut it out so the tree can grow new branch there, which will come out at a up angle and start the cycle all over again. And then the question was about heading the tree. So if the tree keeps growing up, you're going to, again, want to cut to a lateral and try to keep it in check. So that's an example where, I know there's a question about fertilizer. Big trees like that really don't need any fertilizer at all. And so I'm going to kind of address that question at the same time. When the tree is young, 1, 2, 3, 4 years old, yes, they're going to need nitrogen mainly to grow big. Once you get the structure of the tree, for most people growing fruit trees here in Michigan, if you have clay soils or loam soils, your apple tree is going to do pretty good on its own. Yes, you can put fertilizer out there. You can do a soil test if you want to get involved with that. You certainly can, but you're not going to need to fertilize a big old apple tree every year. It's only going to encourage more water sprouts and more woody growth, which you don't really need.
That's great point. And is that why we get water sprouts? Because there's too much fertilizer or too much nutrient or too much water?
Uh, despite the name, it's not so much too much water. I mean, but that is a good thought. I mean, it's really a matter of when you prune out a lot above the soil line, you prune out branches, the roots down below are still alive and they still have energy and they're going to push it somewhere. And so, and a lot of times they'll push that long, fast growth that'll come. And that sometimes it's straight from the roots down below. And sometimes it's at a spot where you did a big cut, like a chainsaw cut. It's going to shoot out a couple branches. The ones that in the chainsaw cut, if you can, train them down. We talked about training with wood. You can also use biodegradable baler twine to wrap that branch and kind of pull it down so it's like at a 90-degree angle, so it's parallel with the ground. That'll make it set flower buds. If you can do it like before the 4th of July, before the end of June, it'll make it set flower buds. But when it goes straight up, it's going for the sky, and it's going to keep doing that until you bring it down or cut it off. But I want to be clear on something. Water sprouts that come out of the ground, straight from the roots, unless you have a tree that's from a seed, which is highly unlikely, you're going to want to cut all that off, because those branches that come from the roots are going to grow apples that are not the variety you bought, that you thought you paid for, when you got the tree, like a Golden Delicious or a Honeycrisp. Remember, apple trees, the roots are literally different wood than the scion up top. And that's where there's a graft union right at the soil line. And so apples and peaches and pears, those are trees we do that with. As opposed to blueberries, where blueberries can regrow from the roots. That's a good thing, because it's going to be the same blueberry that you're eating.
Okay, so the fruit tree spikes that the question was asked, maybe for the younger trees, first couple years they could use it, but after that they really shouldn't need it for fertilizer.
Yes.
Okay.
And it is possible to kill a tree by over fertilizing.
Okay.
You can easily kill a tree. I would almost suggest, I have seen it, it's easier to kill a tree with fertilizer than it is to kill it from not getting fertilizer.
Okay.
Especially here in Michigan, unless you're planning on like straight sand, which I know there's in different parts of Michigan, we got straight sand over by the lake, but in central Michigan here, our soil is usually good enough that there's a lot of nutrients already in the soil. And make sure you do your math on how much nitrogen fertilizer you should be spreading out under that tree. Don't put it all in one spot. And so I would spread it out around the tree. That's a much better, otherwise you'll burn it. And I see the question about water sprouts. Will the water sprouts produce fruit? Yes. And so the water sprouts we were just talking about, last question, it will eventually produce fruit. But sometimes it's not going to be the fruit you want, and it's not going to be a good fruit. Water sprouts, again, come from the roots. Root stock is selected for how it can control the growth of the tree horticulturally. It's not selected for what type of apple it's going to grow. And that's why you don't really see the apple, about what the root stock is. So that's a good question.
Hannah, we got time for one more question. Did you have another question on Facebook?
Yeah, I do have a two-part question. How do you keep squirrels out of peach trees? And then if I have very neglected peach trees, can any pruning be done now before it flowers?
So good luck on the squirrels. And I would say, get on YouTube and look up Mark Rober or something on squirrels. I'm not a squirrel expert. Again, we got to accept the losses. I know that sounds really hypocritical, but it's like, there's only some things you can control, and I have not figured out squirrel control yet. I grow enough of them to feed them, and then I take what's left over. But on the restoring a neglected peach tree, you're gonna look, what I would suggest you do, and this is for all listeners, this year only, 2021. For those of you that were awake on the morning of Ash Wednesday, whatever date that was, it was negative 18 degrees in Charlotte at the airport. Okay, it was negative 18 degrees Fahrenheit. Peachwood starts to die right around there, negative 12, negative 15, negative 18. Anyone with peaches this year, you're going to have dead wood on your tree. I would wait on pruning peaches this year until you see green coming out, okay, of the peaches. Where you see green leaves growing on those peaches, that's going to be your new branches, literally, where the leaves are coming out. And this may not be until end of April or May this year, 2021. And then you're going to want to prune whatever's dead above that, because it, generally speaking, well, you'll see, you know, anything that's dead above that, that doesn't have any leaves coming out, is dead. So cut that off, but have the cut be right above where you see it alive, because that point on, it'll start to grow a new branch from a leaf, and the leaf will just push out another leaf, and it'll eventually be a branch. And try to keep the tree around like a 360. So all those scaffolds, try to have something alive all the way around the tree that'll help the tree heal. The roots have energy. They're trying to push it up to any wood that didn't get frozen when it hit negative 18 degrees. Because again, peaches, like apples, have essentially antifreeze in them, a sugary mix of water that helps them. But peach trees aren't nearly as hardy, winter hardy, as the apples are. So regrow your tree, but wait until you see what wood is alive first before you go out there with pruners and a chainsaw.
That's great. That's good to know. I forgot about that frost, and it'll be interesting to see how much damage there actually is this year. And I'll be curious to hear when people come in to pick up their orders, or as I'm talking to them as they're putting their orders, how their trees look in the next month. So that'll be interesting to follow. Thank you. Okay, well, that we've used our time, and I want to thank Steve and Hannah and all you who've attended tonight's fruit tree pruning workshop. As a reminder, we'll be posting this to ECD's YouTube channel and our Facebook page, of course. If we didn't get to your question, we're going to take note of them, and we're going to try to answer them in our next newsletter coming out within the week. And I'd like to remind you also, the final date for ECD's tree sale pre-order is March 25th. And also, in celebration of ECD's 75th anniversary, we are holding an Eaton with Eaton live Facebook event the second Tuesday of each month for the rest of the year from 12:15 to 12:45. And we're going to highlight food, producer, restaurant, you name it, in Eaton County, and tie it in with the programming we do here at Eaton Conservation District. If you'd like to see the first one that featured Country Mill, please go to our Facebook page or our YouTube channel. As always, thank you for your time. One more note I want to make real quick. When I was out picking berries at Country Mill last year, it was really helpful and interesting to me because I was able to walk along some of the orchard, and to see this pruning in action, if you're questioning it, it was a great walk to get an idea on all ages of trees. It was really neat to see how those trees are pruned. And I know when you're talking about those old trees and you're scared to take that chainsaw to it, it's really comforting to see it in action. So I highly recommend, if you're questioning some of your trees, next time you're out at Country Mill, just take that walk and take a look at what the trees look like out there. It's really beneficial.